Hello, students who are taking Math for Business and Finance and Math Applications. I didn't change the slide again. Boy, I'm just having a tough time with changing this here slide, these slides. Okay, this is part 3, all right? And if you haven't watched the other 2 videos, obviously do. And we're just going to pick up right where we left off in these rules throughout this chapter, okay? Because we're talking about, let's go back up here. We're talking about solving for equations for the unknown, and this is chapter 5. So I'm on the 3rd video talking about the theory in this chapter, okay? So we're up to the multiple processes rule, right? And it says, when solving for an unknown that involves more than one process, do the addition and subtraction before the multiplication and division. All right, so what that means is and I'll use the example in the textbook, all right? H over 4 plus 2 is equal to 5. Okay? So what we want to do is we want to do the addition and subtraction first, then do the multiplication and division. And the reason why we do that is because, and this is outside of the scope of the textbook, remember the reason why multiplication and division are based upon addition and subtraction. Addition and subtraction come first. Multiplication is nothing more than multiples of addition, meaning if I have 2 plus 2 plus 2, that gives me 6, right? If I have 3 times 2, that gives me 6. Well, the reason why we're able to multiply is because we're adding the 2 3 times. So the multiplication is based upon the addition, and that's why we do addition and subtraction first, then do our multiplication and division, right? So with that said, in solving for the unknown, the variable, we do our addition and subtraction first. Well, I want to isolate the variable on one side of the equal sign. Well, in order to do that, I need to subtract 2 from both sides. I'm sorry, erase that. I need to subtract 2 from both sides because why? Plus 2 and a minus 2 ends up being 0. So I end up with h over 4 is equal to 5 minus 2, and that's, of course, h over 4 is equal to 3. Now that we've done that addition and subtraction, now we can do the multiplication and division. Since I have 4 in the denominator, in order to get rid of the 4 so that I only have the letter h left, I multiply both sides by 4. What you do on one side, you have to do on the other. That's one of our previous rules. Where is it? Yep, whatever you do on one side of the equation, you must do on the other. Okay? You see how this is becoming, you're just using these rules, and you have to know which ones to use in which spot, right? So if I go and I have an h over 4, and that means division, well, now I need to multiply 4 times, and what I do on one side, I do on the other. So 4 times h over 4 is equal to 3 times 4. Well, the 4 ends up in the numerator. Remember, this is 4 over 1, right? So I actually have 4 over 1 times h over 4, and when I do that math, I end up with, that's a multiplication. I multiply the numerators, I multiply the denominators, so you end up with 4h over 4, and since I have 4 in the numerator, 4 in the denominator, they cancel each other out because that becomes 1, all right, which is equal to 1h, or just the letter h. Okay. So I have h is equal to 3 times 4, and then h is equal to 12. Right. Now, I realize that was a little sloppy, so let me go back and erase all of this and write it so that it makes a little bit more sense. Go over it again from a theory perspective. I had h over 4 plus 2 is equal to 5. We added and subtracted. So h over 4 plus 2 minus 2 is equal to 5 minus 2. Whatever I do on one side of the equal sign, I have to do on the other side. Well, a plus 2 and a minus 2 is 0, so I'm left with h over 4 is equal to 5 minus 2 is 3. Now, I have h over 4 is equal to 3. How do I get rid of the 4? Because remember, we're trying to just isolate the variable h. Well, since 4 is in the denominator, all right, and remember, this divisor means that we're doing division, I want to multiply if in order to be able to isolate the h. So if I multiply on one side, I have to multiply on the other. Well, I'm going to multiply by 4 times h over 4 is equal to 3 times 4. Whatever I do on one side, I have to do on the other. Now here's the thing. The shortcut is that I can just say this cancels. Remember, this is from a previous chapter, and all I'm left with is h on the left-hand side is equal to 12. But the theory behind the 4 times h over 4 is that 4 over 1, any number over 1 is that number. And I can then extend the divisor line, and since I'm multiplying, I multiply the numerators, which is 4h, and I multiply the denominators, which 1 times 4 is 4. And any number over itself is equal to 1. So that's equal to 1h. And we know that the number 1 in front of the variable means that it's just h itself. Okay, because 1 times h is h. Okay, and it's not writing here. And that's how we arrive at the h is equal to the 12. Okay, again, it's using the previous rules. All right. If you didn't understand that, feel free to contact an instructor. Okay. All right, parentheses rule. And this is getting to be more and more complicated as we move along here. When equations contain parentheses, which indicate grouping together, so in that first slide we had 4 times b plus 1, okay? The parentheses means the quantity, right? And that's grouping the b and it's grouping the plus 1 together, okay? And then we're multiplying that grouping by 4 itself, right? That's what that first sentence means. When equations contain parentheses which indicate grouping together, you solve for the unknown by first multiplying each item inside the parentheses by the number or letter just outside of the parentheses. So again, we had b plus 1, and we put it in parentheses, and that is expressed as the quantity. Okay, from a mathematical perspective, when you're going to read this, you're going to say the quantity b plus 1. In this case here, we're multiplying that quantity by the number 4. Right? And it says, solve for the unknown by first multiplying each item in the parentheses by the number or letter just outside the parentheses. And that means we're going to multiply the 4 times the b, and then we're going to multiply the 4 times the plus 1. Right? Notice I had said plus 1. Right? You have to think of these as in terms of 2 separate entities. Okay? Right? If this was a minus 1, okay, and the reason why I'm being a stickler about this is because if I have a minus 1, right, that can be written as a minus 1 times a plus 1. Is still equal to a minus 1. A minus times a positive, a minus times a positive is a negative. And that's how we have a minus 1. What happens to students sometimes, and the reason why I'm paying such close attention to this, is that students sometimes forget that this sign is related to that constant or that variable. If I have a negative b, sometimes students will just look at the b and forget that there's a negative in front of it. Okay, so when I'm multiplying 4 times this negative b, it actually ends up being 4 times a negative b is meaning 4 times a negative 1 and then 4 times the b itself. This here is two separate entities. It's not a negative b, it's a negative 1, right? It's a negative 1 times b. That's what a minus b represents. So I'm taking 4 times a negative 1 and 4 times a positive b. And I end up with a negative 4b. Okay, because 4 times a negative 1 is equal to negative 4, and 4 times b is equal to b, right? I end up with a negative 4b. Right? That's the math. That's the nitty-gritty. That's the stuff that nobody wants to pay attention to, that we don't want to learn, okay? But we need to. All right, so we were at 4, let's erase that, get rid. 4 times the quantity b plus 1. All right. You first multiply each item inside the parentheses by the number or letter outside the parentheses. So that's 4 times b, and then 4 times the plus 1. Then you continue to solve for the unknown with the opposite processes used in the equation. You know, that goes back up to the rule of where is it? The opposite process rule. You know, you do the opposite. Okay. So then you continue to solve for the unknown with the opposite process used in the equation. Do the additions, subtractions first, and the multiplications and division. Notice that this particular rule is combining several rules at one, in one time in order to be able to solve for this, because we're talking about a little bit more complicated. Here it's telling you do addition and subtraction first, then multiplication and division. You had that in the previous rule, the multiple process rule. It also said continue to solve for the unknown, using the opposite processes, right? Well, we have the opposite process rule. So we're combining several of the rules together as part of the parentheses rule in order to solve for whatever we are, because it's becoming more complicated. Remember, we're trying to solve for the unknown, the variable b. So I take 4 times b as 4b, and then I have 4 times a plus 1, which is a plus 4. Okay. And that is what I'm working with now. Now, obviously, I don't have any equality here, okay, but let's just say this was 5. Let's say this was, say, 20, okay. What I would do is I would add and subtract. So I would subtract 4 minus plus 4 minus 4. And what I do on one side, I have to do on the other. Remember that rule. And what we're doing here is I'm doing additions and subtractions first. Okay. What I'm doing on one side, I end up doing on the other. So that leaves me with 4b is equal to 20 minus 4 is 16. Okay. And now, since I have multiplication here, I'm going to do the opposite process, which is division. I'm going to divide both sides by 4 so that the 4's can cancel out. That means it's a 1b. So I end up with b, and that's equal to 16 divided by 4 is equal to 4. I end up with b is equal to 4. And to check, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the b equaling 4, and I plug it back into the b in order to check. So I would have 4 times 4 plus 1 is equal to 20. And solving for that, well, 4 plus 1 in the parentheses is 5. So I have 4 times 5 is equal to 20. And then 4 times the quantity 5 is equal to 20. And then, of course, 4 times 5 is 20, so that's equal to 20. So I know that my answer of 4 as the variable b is correct. Okay, so with that, I'm going to stop here and move on to the next video.